They ruled empires by day, but what happened behind the curtains of their royal bedchambers was far from majestic, from kings who refused to sleep without a sword under their pillow, to queens who performed nightly fertility ceremonies, while courtiers watched. This isn't fantasy. It's real history. And once you step inside these chambers, you'll never see royalty the same way again. If strange secrets of the crown fascinate you, hit subscribe and stay until the final ritual is revealed. In the medieval world, privacy was a luxury. Even kings couldn't afford. Royal bedrooms weren't cozy sanctuaries. They were political stages. Chamberlains, doctors, and sometimes entire councils were present when a monarch went to bed. And especially when they tried to produce an heir, a queen's nightgown might be inspected. A king's performance quietly recorded. Because every night in that bed wasn't about passion, it was about duty to the crown. And failure to perform, that could mean ward. In many royal courts, the day began with an audience that kings weren't expected to wake up alone. Instead, nobles, advisors, and favored servants gathered for the royal rising ceremony. They watched him stretch, wash, even use the chamber pot. Why? Because witnessing his health and vigor was considered political reassurance. If the king looked weak, rumors of instability could spread before breakfast. Even queens weren't spared. In France, a newlywed queen's bedsheets were publicly examined for signs of consummation. A stained sheet could secure alliances. A clean one could shatter kingdoms. For many medieval queens, the bedroom wasn't just intimate. It was terrifying. Especially on the wedding night. A young queen, often barely a teenager, would be led into the king's bedchamber, not alone, but escorted by noble women, bishops, and whispering attendants. And in some courts, a single candle was left burning, so witnesses could claim the marriage had truly been sealed. Imagine undressing under flickering light, while knowing your dignity wasn't your own. Failure to produce an heir meant humiliation. And sometimes annulment. Because a flame didn't see what others demanded. In certain royal courts, especially in France and England, a disturbing ritual took place after royal weddings. The bedding ceremony. After vows were exchanged and the feast concluded, the newlyweds were escorted to their bed, not privately, but with a full crowd. Courtiers laughed, priests gave blessings, and nobles lifted the sheets. Some even stayed in the room until the curtains were drawn. The message was clear. This marriage was a contract, and the consummation was its most binding clause. For the couple, it wasn't about romance. It was about performance. Under pressure and under watch, some kings feared betrayal so deeply they brought weapons to bed. It said that King Henry VI of England, paranoid and increasingly unstable, slept with a sword under his pillow, convinced his enemies would strike in the dark. Other monarchs took it further, sleeping in armor, locking bedroom doors with hidden bolts, and planting guards inside the chamber. Not for war, but for sleep. Because in royal courts, even dreams weren't safe. One trusted servant could be espied, and one loose curtain could hide the end of a dynasty. In the medieval world, a queen's pregnancy wasn't private joy. It was national business. As soon as a queen was thought to be expecting, her bedroom was transformed into a guarded, sacred space. In France, this was known as the confinement chamber. Windows were sealed, doors heavily guarded. Only select midwives and noble women were allowed inside. When labor began, witnesses were called to verify the child's birth, because fake pregnancies and swapped babies were real political fears. A male heir meant power. And if the baby was still or silent, the queen might never recover her position, no matter how many times she screamed in labor. For queens who failed to produce an heir, the royal bed turned cold and dangerous. In Spain and England, queens were expected to lie still, month after month, under the weight of expectation. They were fed fertility tonics made of herbs, wine, even powdered pearls. Some were forced to sleep on specific sides or time their nights with the moon. And when years passed without a child, whispers began. Is she cursed? Is she even a woman? The same bed that had crowned her as queen now held her hostage. Royal bedrooms were never emptied. Behind the velvet curtains and carved bedposts, silent eyes always lingered. Ladies-in-waiting, chambermaids, body servants, they dressed the monarch, turned down the sheets, and often stayed, listening that some knew who the king visited in secret. Some held scandalous letters. Others clean stained sheets that told more truth than royal proclamations that they were invisible during the day, but at night they were the keepers of whispered affairs, midnight arguments, and forbidden trysts, and one wrong word from them could collapse entire courts. Aging kings were often obsessed with one thing, proving they were still virile. The physicians were summoned nightly, not just to check fevers or wounds, but to inspect the king's body in intimate detail. In France, records show that Louis XIV's physicians tracked his bedroom activity to monitor the health of the monarchy itself. That in some courts, physicians examined royal urine each morning, while astrologers advised the best nights for intimacy based on the stars. And if the king hadn't visited the queen's bed in too long, letters would quietly be sent from ministers, urging him to fulfill his duty. Because even a king's health was public property, not all royal rituals were forced. Some were self-imposed, and deeply strange that King Charles VI of France, during his periods of madness, refused to lie flat in bed. He believed lying down would allow spirits to possess him. So he slept upright, sometimes fully dressed, wrapped in layers of fabric, his back against the wall like a frightened prisoner. Others, like Philip V of Spain, believed that changing shirts too often could disturb the body's energy, so he would sleep in the same sweat-soaked clothes for days. Royalty meant power. But in the darkness of the bedchamber, power often gave way to paranoia. That a royal bed wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of authority. So when kings and queens traveled, their beds traveled too. Massive, carved, velvet-draped beds were dismantled and reassembled at every stop, sometimes requiring entire carts and teams of servants. Because sleeping in a common bed was beneath royalty, and sleeping in a bed that wasn't blessed could invite danger. Even more bizarre, in some regions, royal beds were anointed with oils before sleep, believed to protect the crown from nightmares, infertility, or plots in the night. That it wasn't about rest, it was about ritual and control. Not every royal slipped into bed alone. Behind thick walls and ornate panels, secret passageways often led straight to the bedchamber. Courtiers, mistresses, even spies used these hidden routes. King Henry VIII had private tunnels built to reach in Boleyn's rooms before their marriage. In Versailles, the infamous secret staircase allowed Louis XV's lovers to come and go unseen. That these weren't rumors, they were architectural facts, built to protect both the crown and its secrets. Because while daytime required formality, nighttime was when true alliances were made, some in whispers, some in silk, and all in shadows. Forget luxury. Royal beds may have looked majestic, but inside those silken sheets often lived rot. The mattresses were stuffed with straw or feathers, rarely cleaned. In winter, kings and queens slept with dogs to stay warm, but they also slept with lice, fleas, and sometimes worse. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly burned scented herbs near her bed to mask odors, and Louis XIV had over 400 people assigned to his sleeping routine, yet still complained of itching. Beds were rarely changed. Some monarchs didn't bathe for weeks. In the end, no matter how golden the frame, royalty still slept in very human filth. For medieval royalty, death rarely came in battle. It came in bed. And when it did, it wasn't private. Courtiers gathered silently as the king exhaled his final breath. Clocks were stopped. Mirrors were covered. Curtains drawn. Priests whispered last rites beside embroidered pillows. But even then, the body wasn't alone. That it was inspected, guarded, even watched for signs of movement. Some believed death could be faked. Others feared the monarch's spirit might linger. In England, the deathbed became a place of politics, with nobles positioning themselves near the dying king's hand, hoping for one final word or one last nod toward succession. Strip away the velvet, gold, and marble, and the royal bedchamber wasn't about rest. It was about control. Who entered, who exited, who lay beside the crown. These rituals weren't just bizarre, they were tools to bind alliances, to test loyalty, to keep power breathing through generations, one night at a time. In those candlelit rooms, kings cried, queens bled. And history turned quietly between the sheets. Because in the medieval world, what happened behind closed curtains didn't stay hidden. It shaped dynasties, toppled empires, and left behind stories we still whisper today.